Hey guys, welcome back. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to part 2 of our next installment of our Declaration of Independence signer series, taking a look, of course, at John Penn, our third and final signer from the state of North Carolina. So I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 yesterday, the early life of John Penn. And now part 2, of course, the Declaration of Independence signing and the time surrounding that. And then the time after the Declaration signing, what did John Penn do? And then, of course, his death and a look at his gravesites and that sort of thing. Now, a couple quick notes that I did want to add in from part 1. So Susanna Lime or Lynn Penn, as we know, we kind of went over that. Now, the family name is also spelled Lyme, L-Y-M-E. I found that out. So it can be pronounced Susanna Lynn Penn or Susanna Lime Penn. So I guess it was used in both ways, their family names. So there you have that. Also, I wanted to also let everyone know that John Penn, even though we've only done, let's see, I believe he's the 7th signer we've actually covered so far in this series. He is by far and away the most difficult to find information about. I don't mean normal information about when he served in the Continental Congress and that sort of thing. I mean information that, is pretty accurate, and pictures. Obviously, there was no photographs back when these men were alive. We know that. However, most of them usually have portraits, paintings they had done of themselves, that sort of thing. There is very little about John Penn. Because, again, a lot of people get kind of mixed up and confuse him with John Penn, who was governor of Pennsylvania. So they kind of get the two confused. The John Penn we're speaking about, the Declaration signer from North Carolina, portraits and drawings and pictures, few and far between. Literally few and far between. As a matter of fact, there are some photos that you may see me use that I don't even think are him. There's one that they claim this is John Penn, but I think it's actually William Hooper, another signer from North Carolina. So just take that with a grain of salt, please. That's just what it is. The portraits that we know are accurate are the ones right now that you're seeing on your screen. That is the one that we know. That is what John Penn apparently looked like. That's the depiction of him. So we know that's the accurate one. Any other ones that I use, I mean, it's literally a shot in the dark if it's really John Penn or not. So please keep that in mind as well. So his wife's family name, Lime or Lynn, and the portraits and everything of John Penn, who the heck knows, guys? I really don't know. So there you go. Flying solo for the audio here, so let's jump right into part 2, taking a look at John Penn from North Carolina. Here we go. On February 12th of 1776, while in Philadelphia, John Penn wrote a letter to Thomas Person, Brigadier General in the North Carolina Militia. In his own words, we hear obvious passion. For God's sake, my good sir, encourage our people, animate them to dare even to die for their country. Our struggle, I hope, will not continue long. May unanimity and success crown your endeavors. In April, North Carolina held a critical meeting in Halifax at which the colony's leading men became convinced that a break with Britain was not only imminent, but necessary. In a document called the Halifax Resolves, this body instructed Penn, Hooper, and Hughes to vote for independence. When the big day came, Hooper was out of town, but Hughes and Penn cast their votes in favor of independence. All three signed the Declaration on August 2nd. During his days in Philadelphia, John Penn was perceived as a good-humored man who was chatty among friends but did not say much in Congress. This was odd, since he was known to be a forceful orator in the courtroom, and some historians claim he was capable of reducing the court and jury to tears. The only time we have evidence of him losing his cool was when he squabbled with a South Carolinian named Henry Laurens, John Hancock's successor as President of Congress. The reason for their disagreement is lost, but Laurens challenged Penn to a duel. These standoffs, which date back to the Middle Ages, were a commonly accepted way to settle disputes between two parties. The belief was that duels limited the collateral damage and prevented the likelihood of all-out feuds between noble families. Each culture has its own etiquette or code duello for staging duels. John Penn and Laurens would have named the time and place of the duel, chosen selected witnesses, and even arranged for the presence of a medic. According to the code, the time-honored way of getting out of a duel was to throw away your fire, very obviously shooting one's weapon at the ground. This was the signal that you still had the chutzpah to show up at the duel, but you were not in the duel to kill or be killed today. Your opponent then did the same, and you both saved face. Penn found a remarkably sane way to get out of the duel without firing a single shot. Since he and Laurens lived at the same Philadelphia boarding house, the two met for breakfast on the appointed date. After dining together, they headed to the duel site on Chestnut Street. As they were crossing 5th Street, they came across a deep puddle in the dirt. Penn turned to help the older, heavier man across the gully. In that moment, something must have clicked in Penn's lawyerly brain. He probably thought, "This is ludicrous. How can I take steak and eggs with a guy, help him across the street, and then blow his brains out?" Penn immediately offered to drop the whole thing, and Laurens agreed. John Penn served in Congress until 1780, becoming the senior delegate from his state. He was one of 16 Declaration signers who also signed the Articles of Confederation. Then he worked on the war board of his new state and helped organize the region's defense as General Charles Cornwallis and his troops marched north from South Carolina into Virginia. John Penn's health troubled him, forcing him to retire from politics in 1781. None of the North Carolina signers lived beyond age 50. Penn was dead at 48. Survived by his wife and 3 children, he was buried on the grounds of his home, and later he was reinterred under a signer's monument along with William Hooper at the Guilford Courthouse Military Park in Greensboro, North Carolina. In 1780, he was outstanding for his success in raising militia to oppose the movement of Cornwallis's army through the state. His efforts were triumphantly crowned by the American victories at Kings Mountain and the Cowpens. After the war, John Penn left public life mainly because his wholehearted devotion to the American cause had ruined him financially. He did not survive the Revolution very long. Like the other 2 North Carolina signers, he died in his late 40s, physically ravaged by the ordeal of the war. Although a lesser figure among the founding fathers, John Penn gave the American cause his unfailing best. No man could do more. John Penn was elected to the First Continental Congress and took his seat on October 12th of 1775. John Penn wrote a letter from Philadelphia in February 1776, which read, "My first wish is that America may be free, and second, that she may be restored to Great Britain in peace and harmony and upon just terms." Hearing reports from the other colonies, he soon abandoned all hope of working with the royal government. He wrote to his friend Thomas Person, "For God's sake, my good sir, encourage our people, animate them to dare even to die for their country." As a member of the Provincial Congress at Halifax in April 1776, he favored the instruction to vote for independence. He returned to Philadelphia for the July 2nd vote and to sign the Declaration of Independence on August 2nd of 1776. He was a member of the Continental Congress until 1777, was re-elected in 1778, and served until 1780. On November 15th of 1777, Penn signed the Articles of Confederation. He had declined a judgeship in 1777. In 1780, John Penn became a member of the North Carolina Board of War. He did a major part of the work on this board, although it was opposed both by the Army and by Governor Thomas Burke. It was abolished in 1781. In July of 1781, Penn refused to serve on the Council of State due to illness and resumed his law practice. John Penn was one of the 16 signers who also signed the Articles of Confederation. In 1784, Robert Morris appointed him receiver of taxes for the Confederation in North Carolina. He resigned in a few weeks. He was, with Thornton Yancey, appointed in August of 1783 tax collector for Granville County. In 1784 and 1785, he was a bondsman. Despite John Penn's attractive and congenial personality, there is a traditional story that while he was in Philadelphia, Henry Lawrence, who was at that date president of the Continental Congress, challenged him to a duel for unknown reasons. The two men were living at the same boarding house and had eaten breakfast together on the appointed day set for the duel. Although only 54 years of age, Lawrence is described as elderly and required assistance from Penn in crossing the street. En route to the proposed site, Penn convinced Lawrence that they should settle their differences, and the duel never took place. So I said I would talk a little bit more about his lineage and his genealogy. So his father, Moses Penn, of Caroline County, Virginia, he married in St. Mark's. It was actually at St. Mark's. He married on July 4th, 1739, Catherine Taylor. They had only one child, John Penn. Both apparently died in Caroline County, Virginia. Catherine Taylor was the daughter of John Taylor and his wife, Catherine Pendleton, who were married February 14th of 1716. John Taylor moved to Granville County, North Carolina, and died there. His will gave his grandson, John Penn, 100 pounds. He was the youngest child of James Taylor, the emigrant. James Taylor, the emigrant, was born in 1615 at his ancestral home, Pennington Castle, about 20 miles from Carlisle, England. He died September 22nd of 1698. And he was a descendant of Baron Taillefer. I said that yesterday. That's pretty much it. I mean, it goes into a little bit more, but that's the gist of it. A lot of ancestry and genealogy of John Penn's, especially from his mother's side. dates back to England pretty extensively. So pretty cool stuff, though. So reading some more from some more sources, John Penn emerged as a leader at the Provincial Congress meeting in Hillsborough, North Carolina in August 1775, and was assigned to several important committees to confer with and secure the cooperation of such inhabitants as had scruples against joining the American cause, to effect a temporary form of government, to prepare a civil constitution, and to review and consider statutes and draft bills consistent with the genius of a free people. Arriving in Congress later in that year, John Penn declared, "My first wish is for America to be free." John Penn maintained a hectic schedule for the remainder of the year and into the spring of 1776. In a letter to Thomas Persons in February 1776, Penn underscored the seriousness of the crisis and said that he was clearly on the side of liberty. In April, he returned home to bring a report from Philadelphia and to head up the Provincial Congress Committee, drawing up the particulars of the usurpations and violence committed against America. The Provincial Congress authorized Penn and the other North Carolina delegates to join the other colonies in declaring independence and forming alliances. In this, North Carolina legislature led all the other colonies in declaring for a complete separation from Great Britain. Although the delegates worked in Independence Hall with the windows closed during the unbearably hot summer, there were moments of humor. On July 1st, John Dickinson was well into his second hour of speaking against breaking away from England. Sitting at an angle behind him was John Penn. To the left was John Adams, his arms folded while he weighed the chances of getting a unanimous vote for independence. Or was he asleep? Sitting in the back was Thomas Jefferson, the drafter of the Declaration, whose mind had apparently traveled to Charlottesville, where his bride awaited him. Suddenly, Dickinson's talk was interrupted by a vigorous thunderclap which rattled the building. Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island, the oldest but not the least active of the delegates, dropped the hickory cane his head had been resting on and looked about sharply. Sitting behind him, John Penn jumped up, not at the sound of thunder, but fearful the old gentleman had been frightened. He leaned over Hopkins' shoulder to whisper reassurance. It should be he leaned. He leaned over Hopkins' shoulder to whisper reassurance, telling him there was no reason to be alarmed. "There is rod atop the State House," he said, "one of Dr. Franklin's inventions, the celebrated lightning rod. If by chance a bolt of lightning should strike the belfry, that same rod would run the bolt into the ground." Turning to Penn, Hopkins roared, "I don't give a damn about any rod or lightning bolt. I am just tired of Dickinson's long-winded harangue." Many years later, around 1820, Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams concerning his recollection of the North Carolina delegates during the debate on independence. He remembered that John Penn had played a key role, that there had been no greater Tory in Congress than Hooper, but that Hughes was sometimes firm, sometimes feeble, changing direction according as the day was clear or cloudy. It was Penn, according to Jefferson, who fixed the vote of Hughes so that North Carolina came to support the cause of liberty. Hooper abstained on the vote for independence, but later all three delegates signed the Declaration of Independence. According to historian E.A. Alderman, the delegates combined the functions of financial and purchasing agents of commissary generals and reporters of all great rumors or events. They had to buy military supplies, arrange shipment, and conduct intricate financial operations. All these things John Penn did besides attending numerous committee meetings and the regular sessions of Congress for nearly 6 years. It is difficult for us to imagine the personal sacrifices made by John Penn and other members of the Continental Congress in order to serve their fellow countrymen. To travel 400 plus miles to Philadelphia by horseback or stagecoach involved unbelievable hardships and dangers. Even in good weather, the dirt roads were only rutted Indian trails, which turned into quagmires in a storm. Life was at risk as the travelers were subject to attacks by renegade Indians and brutal highwaymen. Taverns were few and far between. Food was awful, and you slept on the floor, 10 or more to a room, with the possibility you might wake up in the morning missing your boots, purse, pants, or baggage. For his service in the Congress, John Penn received no salary, only an occasional small voucher for travel reimbursement. As travel was slow, it took him 2 weeks or so to journey from Granville County to Independence Hall. In view of these hardships, it is not surprising that so many of the delegates were afflicted by poor health and that many died quite young. Early in July 1779, the Pennsylvania Packet stated that not all members of Congress were free of scandal. The publication attacked Congress for ineptitude in economic matters, coupled with charges that some members were using their position to make fortunes on wild speculations which undermined continental currency. Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, a merchant member of Congress, demanded that the publisher of the packet be brought to court for slander and disrespect of Congress. John Penn then took to the floor in defense of freedom of speech. His view, according to historian Page Smith, was that stopping freedom of speech not only endangered liberty, but that trying to stop free expression was no easier than draining the ocean with a thimble. Gentlemen, Penn said, talk of imprisoning the printer or author is foolish. If you, Congress, have the power, which I doubt, and were to imprison the editor for 6 months, he would come out a far greater man than when he went in. What was quite out of character for John Penn occurred during the summer heat of a congressional session when Henry Lawrence, the President of Congress, and John Penn agreed to a duel over some murky matter which history does not record. The day of the duel found the antagonists and their party of seconds having breakfast together at the same hotel. A previous rain had turned Philadelphia's unpaved streets into a treacherous quagmire. After breakfast, Penn and Lawrence were walking together toward their appointed meeting place when the two men came to a crossing deep in mud. In a compassionate moment, John Penn offered the older man his arm for support before they attempted to cross the street. History does not record the exact words exchanged, but they quickly forgot their disagreement and returned to the hotel without firing a shot, probably exchanging a few toasts afterwards to complete the proceedings. In 1780, the British embarked on their attempt to win the Revolutionary War in the South, defeating the American Army under General Gates at Camden on August 16th of 1780. Colonel Otto Williams, a combatant, gave a vivid description of the desertions and looting that took place. Leading a torrent of unnamed militia who fled the scene was General Gates and Richard Caswell, a general who later became governor of North Carolina, who fled non-stop on horseback to Charlotte, 60 miles or so away. Another general had his sword stolen from his tent. Another group helped themselves to Caswell's mess, drinking a pipe of excellent Madeira. On August 23rd of 1780, at Hillsborough, the General Assembly appointed Penn and two others to the three-man Board of War in North Carolina to prepare for the British invasion. John Penn stepped forward to take charge when the other two members of the board proved incompetent. He established effective communication with General Greene, who replaced General Gates, raised recruits, found funding for the military, provided transportation and supplies, disarmed Tories, and generally spurred the people into action. John Taylor of Caroline described John Penn's accomplishments during this period. He, meaning Penn, was surrounded by discouraged friends, helpless citizens, or inveterate foes. But he had a task to discharge, and an arduous one. But nature had formed him for the effort. Indefatigable, cheerful, extremely courteous in his manners, firm in his political principles, and invigorated by an inextinguishable ardor, he went through the crisis with honor to himself, to the satisfaction of the state, and rendered service inestimable to the prosecution of the war. American victories at Kings Mountain and Cowpens and Greene's standoff with the British at the Battle of the Gulliford Courthouse compelled the British Army under Cornwallis to begin a retreat through North Carolina and Virginia that ended with the victory at Yorktown. Jealous, perhaps, of Penn's success and feeling that his actions impinged on his own authority, Governor Burke recalled Penn and persuaded the legislature to abolish the Board of War in 1781. John Penn was characterized as having an attractive and congenial personality, unobtrusive and unassuming, but remarkably efficient, likable and discreet. He quickly won the respect and confidence of his colleagues in the Continental Congress. Although John Penn never wavered in support of the cause of freedom, he was a weary man when he returned in 1781 to his home and beloved wife in Stovall, his health somewhat shattered by the wear of 6 years in Congress. By the wear of 6 years in Congress. The strain had been heavy, and weariness must have removed from his sight any dreams he may have had of future political or judicial goals. He walked the path of duty without flinching. The future of America lay within the hands of others, and the road ahead pointed toward liberty, which was finally achieved in 1783. Penn resumed his law practice and continued to do so in the next few years preceding his death. John Penn died on September 14th of 1788 and was buried at his home a few miles northeast of Stovall in Granville County, North Carolina. On April 25th of 1894, his remains were reinterred under the Signers Monument, together with the remains of William Hooper, close by the equestrian statue of General Nathaniel Greene at the Gulliford Courthouse National Military Park. On March 16th of 2008, a DSDI plaque was dedicated to the memory of John Penn and William Hooper at the Signers Monument, and an elaborate ceremony was performed on the occasion, including a 21-gun salute. In Washington, D.C., near the Washington Monument, in a memorial park dedicated to the signers of the Declaration, there are 56 granite blocks, one of which bears the name of John Penn. And on June 6th of 1933, a memorial tablet to Penn's great-grandfather, James Taylor, was unveiled at King and Queen Courthouse in Richmond, Virginia, listing several of his descendants, including John Penn, signer of the Declaration of Independence. John Penn married Susanna Lynn, or Lime, of Granville County, North Carolina on July 28th of 1763. No doubt, family ties influenced the Penn's move to North Carolina in 1774. John Penn purchased a farm in the northern part of Granville County near present Stovall, North Carolina. The following year, he was elected to the 3rd Provincial Congress, which met at Hillsborough on August 20th of 1775. An active member of the Congress, John Penn was elected to succeed Richard Caswell as delegate to the Continental Congress. Caswell had resigned to become the treasurer for the Southern District of North Carolina. The original congressional delegation, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, and Richard Caswell, were all Easterners who supported Governor William Tryon against the regulators. John Penn's election was clearly an attempt to appease backcountry leaders like Penn's neighbor and political supporter, Thomas Person. Although Penn frequently disagreed with Hooper and Hughes on political questions, he shared their hope for reconciliation with Great Britain. John Penn was the first of the three to favor independence. Writing to Thomas Person on February 14th of 1776, he advocated foreign alliances even if the consequence was total separation from the mother country. By March, all three delegates believed that independence was inevitable. John Penn and William Hooper returned to North Carolina to attend the 4th Provincial Congress at Halifax and receive instructions. They arrived in Halifax on April 15th, 3 days after the Congress had voted to instruct their Continental delegates to vote for independence. Penn was re-elected to the Continental Congress, but remained in Halifax until the Provincial Congress adjourned. He returned to Philadelphia in June, and with Hughes, cast North Carolina's vote for independence on July 2nd. In December of 1776, the 5th Provincial Congress appointed Thomas Burke to John Penn's seat in the Continental Congress. But when the First Assembly under the new state constitution met the following April, Penn, who was a member of the lower house, won the seat held by Joseph Hughes. The bitterly contested election was influenced by charges that Hughes, an Eddington merchant, had been neglecting his congressional duties to engage in a profitable trade as commissioned agent of the Congress's secret committee. And I think I said Eddington, it's Edenton as we know. Although John Penn never attained prominence as a member of the Continental Congress, he attended the proceedings for 1,038 days, longer than any other North Carolina delegate during the Revolutionary War. And he served on 14 committees and 8 standing boards. Believing that a permanent union was necessary, he signed the Articles of Confederation on July 16th of 1778. Along with the other North Carolina delegates, he consistently voted with the Southern Bloc. Criticism that Penn neglected his congressional duties seems on the whole unjustified. The correspondence of the North Carolina delegates who served with him provides no basis for the charge beyond a December 1778 letter from Thomas Burke to Governor Richard Caswell describing the gaiety and dissipation, public assemblies every fortnight, and private balls every night. Burke concluded, "In all such business as this, we propose that Mr. Penn shall represent the whole state." In 1779, Henry Lawrence challenged Penn to a duel. As he assisted the elderly Lawrence across the street, on the way to the dueling ground, Penn proposed that their plans be abandoned. Lawrence agreed, but continued to disdain Penn's politics and abilities. Later that year, Charles Thomson, Secretary of the Congress, reported that Lawrence answered Penn in debate singing, "Poor little penny, poor little penny." The British victory at Camden on August 16th of 1780 paved the way for invasion of North Carolina. The military threat led to a crisis in government. The Constitution did not provide the governor with adequate emergency power, and at Governor Abner Nash's request, the Assembly created a 3-man board of war with control of military affairs consisting of Penn, Colonel Alexander Martin, and Ordnance Davis. They met at Hillsborough in September 1780. Since the other 2 members were absent during most of the board's 4-month existence, John Penn acted alone much of the time. The board was primarily involved in equipping and supplying the North Carolina militia and General Nathanael Greene's army operating in North Carolina. It provided energetic leadership during the crisis, coordinating military activities and securing provisions and transporting them to the armies. The Assembly abolished the board in January of 1781 after complaints from military officers who resented civilian interference with military affairs and from Governor Nash, who claimed that the board had usurped its authority. 5 months later, John Penn was elected to the Governor's Council. He was president of the council during the closing months of the war, when the council met frequently with Governor Thomas Burke. After 2 years on the council, John Penn was defeated for re-election in 1783. The following year, Robert Morris appointed him receiver of taxes for the Confederation in North Carolina, but Penn resigned the office within a month of his appointment. John Penn was buried at his home near Island Creek in Granville County, and in 1894, his remains were reinterred at Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. 2 children, William and Lucy, survived. An etching of John Penn by H.B. Hall is in the Emmett Collection, New York Public Library. So now reading from that older source, in 1775, he was elected a member of the Continental Congress, in which body he took his seat on the 12th of October. He was successfully re-elected to Congress in the years 1777, 78, and 79, in which body he was distinguished for his promptitude and fidelity. He was seldom absent from his seat, and hesitated not, either from want of firmness or patriotism, to urge forward those measures which were calculated to redress the wrongs and establish and perpetuate the rights of his country. Perpetuate the rights of his country. After the return of peace, John Penn retired to the enjoyment of private life. The incidents in the remaining portion of his history were, therefore, probably few, and differed in nothing from those which usually belong to individuals of respectability in the shades of peaceful retreat. His death occurred in the month of September 1788 at the age of 46 years. He had 3 children, 2 of whom died unmarried. During 1777, subsequent to the departure of 2 of his colleagues, Joseph Hughes and William Hooper, John Penn assumed the position of leader of the North Carolina delegation in Congress. Penn had supported the break from Britain, voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, and signed the document in its parchment form. During his term in Congress, John Penn also supported the Articles of Confederation, which were adopted on November 15th of 1777 and forwarded to each state for ratification. Subsequent to ratification, the Articles became effective on November 1st of 1781, and on that day, the journals of the Continental Congress listed Penn as one of the signers. While in Congress, John Penn became engaged in a disagreement with Henry Laurens. The argument turned serious and Laurens challenged Penn. The challenge was accepted, but prior to the actual duel, Lawrence and Penn came to the conclusion that it was not worth one of them being killed. They reconciled their differences. Later, during 1780, North Carolina was placed in great jeopardy because of British offensive action in the South, particularly the British victory at Camden, South Carolina, that August. In 1780, Governor Abner Nash, who succeeded Governor Richard Caswell, recalled John Penn to place him on the Board of War, a three-man committee hurriedly created by legislature in September. The committee was charged with overseeing the military operations in North Carolina. John Penn became the foremost member, and his control over the military caused many feathers of the governor and the military officers to be ruffled. Pressure upon the legislature resulted in abolition of the board in January of the following year, permitting the governor and the military to regain their power. While John Penn remained in charge, the North Carolinians, supported by the Continental Army under General Nathanael Greene, blocked the British from scoring success and regaining the state. Cornwallis and his force moved northward to Virginia and there met his demise at Yorktown during October of 1781. Meanwhile, John Penn's health had begun to deteriorate. He retired from public life in July of 1781 after declining an appointment to the Governor's Council, but later, for a short while in 1784, he acted as tax receiver for the state. John Penn lived only until September of 1788. He died at his residence at age 47. His wife, Susanna, survived him for many years, but the date of her death was unavailable. John Penn, who finalized his last will and testament in Granville County during 1784, named his son William as executor, and he left his estate to William and his daughter Lucy, who was married to John Taylor, a cavalry officer in the Virginia line during the American Revolution. In conjunction, some earlier sources have noted that John and Susanna had only one child, Lucy. However, John's will explains the existence of his son William, who never married. Other sources also mention that the Penns had 3 children, with only one reaching maturity. Others, including the National Park System, mention the Penn family having reared 3 children. The author was unable to identify the name of the 3rd child. Just another little brief synopsis. John Penn was one of few men who signed the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation. He served alongside fellow North Carolina delegates William Hooper and Joseph Hughes. He died shortly before George Washington took office as the first president of the United States. He never saw his contribution to the United States come into reality because of early death, but his contributions were not forgotten. John Penn was born in Caroline County, Virginia. At the time, Virginia was the largest colony in the Union and had much wealth tied up in its tobacco crop as well as the slave trade. Only child to Father Moses and Mother Caroline Taylor. His father did not see the need for education. We knew all this from part 1. John Penn was from Virginia, and his profession was law. He moved to Granville County, North Carolina to establish his practice. In 1775, he began a meteoric rise in his political career when he was elected first to the North Carolina Assembly and weeks later replaced Richard Caswell in the Continental Congress. He was known as a radical for supporting independence, but records show that he barely spoke in Congress. John Penn was apparently so quiet that he barely ever spoke in Congress except to the delegates seated next to him. John Penn was the longest-serving North Carolina delegate during the war and would also go on to sign the Articles of Confederation in July of 1778. In 1781, John Penn was back in North Carolina where he assisted Governor Nash in equipping and organizing the militia to assist General Greene during the Guilford Courthouse campaign. John Penn is buried under the Signers Monument at the Guilford Courthouse, the Guilford Military Park there in Greensboro, North Carolina. So as far as John Penn's relationship to slavery, he was a slave owner. I don't really find too much in the way of like exact number of slaves that he owned. But I do know that he definitely was a slave owner. The reason I know this is because not only did I read it a little bit in the genealogy, as I had said, but also when I was there visiting his original gravesite, there actually is a kind of an interesting, really, you guys will see it. There's a slave gravesite right next to where his original gravesite is. So there's a slave cemetery back there in the middle of the woods, which was once obviously John Penn's property. So those buried there, those enslaved people that are buried there, definitely are enslaved people of John Penn's. I don't have any names, unfortunately. I always like to kind of read the names of enslaved people. I think it's important. But unfortunately, I just don't really have any names to read off. But you're going to see in my bonus footage here in part 2, the enslaved cemetery, the enslaved person's cemetery. I took a video, and it's crazy. The video that I took, you guys will see it in part 2, the bonus footage here in part 2. I keep in mind, this was back in 2020 when I had no idea that I would ever be doing any sort of YouTube. Not for presidents, vice presidents, and especially not for declaration signers. So this is like really raw, so to speak. I know that sounds kind of silly. I don't really, I don't script anything, if you guys can't tell. I kind of just go off the cuff and just do my thing in all these things, videos and all. But this is really raw because this is before I ever knew that I would be sharing any of this with the public, with a YouTube audience like you guys. So you're going to see in my bonus footage, it was a very, very eerie feeling at that enslaved person's cemetery. It's one of the very few places where I mean, I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, where I like felt an energy. I'm not saying that I, saw ghosts or anything like that, but I could just feel a presence of sadness and sorrow. And I only felt that in very, very few places that I ever visited during all of my travels and in all my time to cemeteries. But John Penn's slave cemetery was one of those places where I felt that. So you're going to see that in part 2 bonus footage coming up soon. Also, now, moving on to something else, this picture is supposedly an oil painting of John Penn wearing a curled, powdered wig, blue coat with yellow lapels, and white shirt with ruffles. So this is apparently an oil painting of him wearing a wig. Again, this is new information from the National Park Service. So you would think they're pretty accurate, but I'm not sure. I really don't know. I can't say for certain what the situation is there. Just a little more information. During the American Revolution, John Penn contributions to the war effort were noteworthy. Before signing the Declaration, Penn and Joseph Hughes, both North Carolina delegates, voted for independence from Great Britain. Penn also signed the Articles of Confederation. Governor Abner Nash appointed him to serve on the North Carolina Board of War. Penn proved to be most active member of the board. He supplied war materials to Nathaniel Greene's Continentals and Francis Marion's guerrillas. As a result of these actions, Penn has been credited for Charles Cornwallis's ultimate defeat. Following the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence signatory was appointed in April of 1783 by Robert Morris, another signer of the Declaration, as North Carolina's receiver of taxes for the Confederation government. 1 month later, however, Penn resigned, not given sufficient authority to collect taxes, but then returned to practicing law until his death. And although a World War II attack transport ship, USS John Penn, was dedicated in Penn's honors, the North Carolinians' efforts during the American Revolution and defense of liberty have been largely overlooked. Just another little excerpt here. 1774, we know all that. As a delegate during his tenure, he signed the Declaration. He practiced law until his death in 1788. The naval ship USS John Penn was named in his honor. A historical highway marker honoring Penn was erected near his home in Stovall in 1936. It was the first such marker erected by the state of North Carolina. Very first one. Erected in his honor in 1936. Pretty cool stuff. And I think that's pretty much going to do it, guys, for John Penn. I think we've pretty much covered it. I hope you enjoyed this. Look, a very obscure signer, a guy that's really forgotten, often confused with another John Penn, but our third and final signer from the state of North Carolina, John Penn. And remember, we are taking a 2-week break for the Christmas holiday, and Henry and I will return on January 4th with our next signer, who's going to be a signer from the state of South Carolina. We're on to South Carolina, and we will be doing all of the South Carolina Declaration signers next. And that will begin on January 4th of 2023. I wish all of you a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, whatever you may celebrate. I wish you the happiest and healthiest, and a very happy, healthy New Year to everyone out there. Henry and I really appreciate all the support, all the love. Thank you so much for everything. Keep all those subscriptions and comments, questions, all of it coming. Stay tuned. Bonus footage. I'm going to show you my visit. Of course, I'm going to show you the Signers Monument again, even though you've seen it already. That's where John Penn currently is interred, underneath the Signers Monument. But I am also going to show you in bonus footage my photos and video from my visit to his original gravesite. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much, guys. I hope you're enjoying this Declaration of Independence signer series. And again, happy holidays to everyone. And we will see you in a couple of weeks on January 4th of 2023. We will see you then. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey guys, TJ here with Dead History, and I had to show you guys this because it's truly incredible to me. So, just to give you an idea, you see on Google Earth here, see this line? This is North Carolina where this red marker is, and this is Virginia. So it's real close to the Virginia border, as you can see. See, now you see Stovall right here where my cursor is, right below the marker. You see Stovall, North Carolina. I just want to give you guys an idea of where John Penn's original gravesite is. So there's Stovall, and I don't remember exactly how I came in. I know I was near this church here, this Baptist church, and as you see, there's no way for me to zoom in, but this is a regular road, as you can see, a paved road, okay? And then you have to go down a very long dirt road, just to give you an idea. So this is all paved here, paved, and then you eventually have to turn down this dirt road. So all this looks As you can see how it's paved? Paved road. It actually might be rock. It might even turn to kind of like a stone, because a lot of this was dirt road. So you come back, you go down this long dirt road, long, and then it turns really into a dirt road. Then you have to make a left, which I do remember doing, and this long dirt road. Guys, there's nothing back here. Like, I know, like, it's kind of blurry when you zoom in, but there is nothing back here. It's just dirt road. And you drive, and eventually you get to this place where right around here is where you can park the car. And then you walk back, and where this marker is where John Penn's original gravesite is. So just to zoom out and give you some perspective, it's nothing but woods, guys. So his original plantation was somewhere right here, somewhere in this vicinity where he lived, and that is where he was originally buried, and that is where his wife and his infant child, who died probably, when they were young, an infant, obviously, is buried as well. And I believe his wife is still there. I don't believe his wife was ever reinterred with him. But you see here, like, it looks like there's some, like, almost like construction area. Looks like maybe even lumber, maybe like a lumber type facility where they produce lumber. But that's all that's back here. There's nothing back here. So again, take a look. It's nothing but wood. Gills Creek, I mean, nothing but woods. So just to give you an idea, a perspective of where his original gravesite is and how crazy it is to find it and get to it. So that gives you some idea of what you're about to look at here any second now. So normally I don't really take too many videos, but this is unbelievable. So there's the car all the way back there. I'm in the middle of the woods, if anybody can't tell. And there's this tiny little sign that says Penn, which is right over there, which I will be showing you, and Slave, which is supposedly that way. There's an old slave cemetery. But as I was saying, this is the original burial site of John Penn, who was a Declaration of Independence signer. And it's literally in the middle of the woods. You're in the middle of mountains in North Carolina. It's incredible. This is really, really cool. And there it is, the original grave of John Penn. So again, I find myself in the middle of the woods, and pretty sure I'm standing on top of a slave cemetery from back in the 1700s. And yeah, there's just it may sound very silly to people, but there's like a weird feeling, like a presence when you're here. And as you see, there's these rocks that really, like, this doesn't really look like it's natural. Maybe it was an old marker. And this as well, here, out of nowhere. This almost looks like this is definitely some sort of marble. some sort of granite, I should say, maybe. It looks like a marble. And right here, this little sign does say cemetery careful. So I have a feeling that those are old markers of slaves, because I really don't see anything else that would indicate anybody else. I just, you know, I don't really see anything else. So I'm just missing something, but I don't really see much else. So I'm gonna assume that this is a slave markers right here, and that one as well, because I would assume that slaves did not really have headstones since they were slaves, unfortunately. So I mean, yeah, and look here, here's another one, kind of just like out of nowhere. They look like markers. They don't look like natural stones that are just sitting here. So that's pretty incredible. And I guess they were John Penn's slaves that lived back, that lived on his property and were slaves of his. So this is unique. This was not easy to find. I'm about 4 or 5 miles into a dirt road, a literal dirt road. So there's nothing around here. I'm in the middle of the woods. So this is unique. This is the part of history that is just lost and forgotten. And unfortunately, nobody bothers to try to see it. As you see here, look. Slave. And then John Penn was that way. So there's where the slave little trail is, and that's what I gather.